Hello and welcome to Tim's BMW repairs and information. Well, I've done a buyer's guide on the 650 before, the 650i, but we're going to do things from a completely different perspective. We're going to do a buyer's guide from the position of being a buyer, come to have a look at a car on a forecourt. Now, we know that these cars have got a terrible reputation because of the N62 engine with the valve stem seals, coolant transfer pipe, oil leaks, and the 6-speed mechatronics gearbox with its harsh changes and then blowing itself to smithereens. Well, we're going to pretend to be a buyer coming to have a look at this car, and I'm going to show you 5 very important things to check, which will at least give us a fighting chance to make sure we're going to buy a car which is going to last a few 100,000 miles, rather than lasting a few miles, which some of them do. Now, of course, in the UK, this is £5,000 or £6,000 worth of car, not much at all. Go into parts of Europe and it's getting very expensive for these cars, and in the US as well, they're pretty expensive. So it's not a trivial amount of money, and so our aim today is to look at the things to make sure we're not going to have the very expensive things need replacing almost straight away. It's not that hard. You don't need any tools or any equipment apart from a camera phone with a light in it. That's quite important. But what we'll do is we'll go straight from the start to the finish as though this is a live video. We'll have a look at the engine, we'll have a look at bits and bobs, and then we'll decide whether this car's any good. Right, let's get on with it. Right, well, this is a great place to start. Lift up the bonnet, stick your head in the engine bay. Yeah, most people lift up the bonnet, stick the head in the engine bay and just look and say, well, that's an engine. But no, there's 2 very important things to check while we're here. What we're looking for is if the car has had extended service periods, because that absolutely kills the N62. And it was the bugbear of the N62 that they are failing quite early, sort of 60, 70,000 miles, and these valve stem seals were failing. That's because extended service intervals meant that the oil started to break down and it lost certain properties. Obviously it's a lubricant, but it's also a detergent, a plasticizer, something that looks after plastic components, a rubbicizer that keeps rubber components and silicon components flexible. Now, if you leave an engine too long with the same oil in it, and it can be measured not in miles but in years is the problem. If you leave it longer than a year, then it will start to break down. And when it breaks down, then things like the valve stem seals start to fail. Right, well, it's very difficult to look back in history, but you can through the oil filler cap. So let's have a look in there, and what you need is a camera phone with a light on it. So let's get on with it. Right, let's take the lid off. First impressions, yeah, that looks lovely and shiny, doesn't it? Nice bright silver chain. To the left is the gold of the camshaft journal holders. And you can see that nut down there. That looks nice and clean, doesn't it? Forward of the chain is the Vanos unit, and that should be a dark grey and silver. Now, we mention those colours because if the engine has had extended oil periods, then the detergents break down, and then instead of the oil circulating nicely, it will start to stick to components. And the one thing it sticks to is the Vanos units and over the camshaft. And that nut in particular, if that's gone black or very dark brown, put the cap on and walk away. I really mean it. That means that the engine's had extended oil change periods and the engine's become damaged. And if the valve stem seals aren't leaking now, they're going to do so quite quickly. So that is a very important check to make. Absolutely imperative on the N62 to make sure that the under the oil filler cap looks absolutely perfect. It's very important, that one is. And that's the most important check to make on the N62. Rightio, check number 2 for the engine is coolant. Now, I'm always going on about coolant. I mean, surely coolant's just an antifreeze component. Well, it isn't. Coolant contains many other compounds other than just its antifreeze compounds. One of them is a lubricant, one of them is an anti-corrosion agent, and then it's got rubbicizers and plasticizers to look after the coolant tank and all the pipe work. And more importantly than that, the coolant transfer pipe. Yeah, the coolant transfer pipe is the most important problem we have with these engines. It's a very difficult fix on these cars. BMW does it, then it costs, well, more than the worth of the car, I'm afraid. So very important that we check that it's actually got BMW coolant in it, because other coolants may not possess the properties that are required for this BMW N62 engine. So the way we do that is we get the camera phone again, we just put it above the coolant tank. Well, first of all, check that the actual float is bobbing up and down to start with. Give it a poke, make sure it's actually got coolant in it and to the right level. But then poke the float down with the camera phone, with the camera running and the lights on, and we expect the float to turn blue. Blue is good. Blue is BMW coolant. If it's any other colour, put the cap on and walk away. I know it's just so tempting with these cars, say, oh, I expect that other coolant is fine, no problem at all, the rest of the service information looks great. Nah, if it hasn't got BMW coolant in it, it hasn't been looked after properly. There's a good reason why BMW asks for you to use their BMW coolant, and it isn't just so they make money on it, it's because their BMW coolant has so many other properties to it. So there's absolutely no reason to use any other coolant than BMW coolant. And if it's another colour, then a different coolant has been used, and most likely it's done for price, for cost purposes. BMW coolant is quite expensive, but not in the sort of realm of the engine problems you get when you don't use it. So imperative, the coolant has to be blue, and then at least you've got a chance it's BMW coolant. If it's any other colour, just walk away. I really mean that. Right, here we are with the next check. It helps if you've got someone who can actually stand around the back of the car to check if any blue smoke comes out of the exhaust when the car's first started. Now, if you've got valve stem seal problems, that's when it will occur. That's because if the car's been sitting any length of time, oil will get past those seals, go down the valve stems, and then it'll get burnt out of the exhaust as soon as the engine started up. We also expect to see two things happen. First of all, we should see a nice idle at about somewhere over 1000 RPM. And also then, after a few seconds, the idle should return to about 700. And that's very important because the initial idle is done by throttle body control. So the valves have a certain lift on them. Throttle body controls the idle speed. After a few seconds, it will revert to valve lift control of the engine speed. So here we go. Right, have your friend round the back or have a camera watching the back as well. So when we first start it, we don't want any oil smoke. Right, we should start up quickly and cleanly, and the idle should return to just over 1000 RPM. Now, how do you tell the difference between steam and oil smoke? Here we go, I'll show you. With your camera, put it over the exhaust. That's steam coming out of there. Now, how can we tell? We move the camera away from the stream and the picture should come back looking bright again like that. Do that again. That's steam coming out. Now, if that was oil smoke, the lens is going to stay sooty because obviously you've got oil particles. If it's steam, it just evaporates and the picture comes back looking perfect again. So all we've got coming out of here is a tiny amount of steam, very normal in these sort of weather conditions. We're about 8 degrees C at the moment. So once more, into the exhaust, bring it straight into the exhaust, right into it. Wait until it goes all steamy, move the camera out of the way. Few seconds and the picture's back. That's steam, not smoke. Right, should have someone round the back checking for smoke. If you haven't got the smoke in the first few seconds, that's a good sign. Now what we do is we wait until we go to Valvetronic control of the engine speed. It takes just a few seconds, and while we wait, feel the car as sitting in your seat. Make sure nothing's rocking or anything to indicate a misfire. Should absolutely steady and stable. There we go, we've reduced idle speed to around about 700 RPM. That's fantastic, that's what we'd expect. Now if you're going to get misfires, it's at this point when we're at 700 RPM and we've got Valvetronic control. Reason for that is the Valvetronic system can have problems where it will lift one valve more than another, and where you have a valve that doesn't open far enough, then you'll get a misfire on that cylinder. Okay, this can be checked obviously using diagnostics, using IMPA to check the roughness of the engine, but most garages won't let you put diagnostics on the car, and I don't blame them really. You can do some serious damage. Right, let's go and have a listen to the engine. Right, what we're expecting at 700 RPM is a very quiet engine. Get a slight tapping from the vacuum pump down here, makes a sort of drocky sort of noise, and at some point the charcoal canister ventilation system will get going, and I can hear it now. I'll try and bring you to a place so you can hear it. It's down here, yeah, it's just down there. That's it there, that ticks away. Now that does put a few people off because they think you've got a noisy lifter, but it isn't. That will stop ticking soon. It ticks for about 1 or 2 minutes, and what that's doing is drawing vapour through the charcoal canister to get rid of any fuel vapour which is inside it. Okay, so the engine's ticking over, sounding nice. The noisiest thing you should hear is that charcoal canister vent system. Shouldn't be hearing any tipping or tapping or any sorts of noises from the engine, and it should be smooth to your hand as well. Get a few vibrations for your hand, but certainly nothing that's going to move the engine in its mounts. As you can see from this is absolutely dead stable. You can't really tell that it's on, apart from it's obviously the belts are whizzing round, and it's very quiet. Now if you hear a dropping noise from the vacuum pump, that's usually an air leak. So if I remove the filler cap, there you go, hear that? Might think that's something horrible. That's not, that's the vacuum pump. Without any crankcase pressure control, it makes an awful racket, but don't worry about that. This one's as quiet as it can be. Ventilation's still going on in there. But yes, I'd be happy with this engine so far. It's nice and quiet. It's sitting still. As I say, the only tapping we've got is from the charcoal canister vent valve. Hopefully that'll go off in a second and you'll be able to tell the difference. While we're here, we'll check for oil leaks. Don't be surprised. All these V8s have oil leaks to some extent. And if you haven't got one today, you'll have one tomorrow. One of the usual places is from the underneath of the vacuum pump, so I'll get my hand underneath there. Dry as a bone, I'm glad to say. That's because I repaired that a while ago. But yeah, we usually get a few weeks from here and there. Oh, now the vent valve's just about to turn off, I think. Yeah, so all we can hear now is the sort of various little noises from the engine. So anyway, that gives you a good impression of what sort of noises you should expect from the N62. Nothing knocking, nothing vibrating, absolutely dead still in the engine bay there, and idling happily and peacefully at 700 RPM. Right, well let's go for our test drive next. As this is a convertible, I'll put the convertible top up, and it's a lovely place to sit. I'll tell you that for nothing. It's a lovely car to drive. But we're not here for the loveliness, we're here for checking stuff. Rightio. 2 things we're going to check. First of all is for smoke during harsh acceleration, and the gearbox, and that's most important. Right, let's get going. Right, first thing you should notice is just how smooth and quiet the engine is. I'm hardly having to raise my voice at all. What we expect is the gearbox to change gear so quietly and carefully that we don't really notice it. We're now in third gear and we didn't notice the change between first and second, second and third. Very smooth. Right, we never use full power on these engines when they're cold. We got to wait for it to warm up at least a bit before we can give it some welly. Really not good for them to put a lot of power through them when they're stone cold. And that sun is low. And again, we've gone through, we're at fourth gear now, so we've gone through 3 changes. Absolutely no jolts at all. It's been really nice and smooth. Now, if you've got a problem with the Mechatronics gearbox, the gear changes are very harsh, especially the first to second, second to third, and then when you get up some speed, the 5th to 6th gear can be absolutely horrendous. So it's important that we check all of those, and it'll do that harsh gear change whether you're in standard mode or Steptronic, so we can check both. And I go into Steptronic now, so we can select 6th gear, 5th gear, 6th gear. You hardly notice it changed gear at all. It is really smooth. So we change back through the gears as well. 4th gear, 3rd gear. Absolutely perfect. You really don't feel the changes at all. You feel the engine revs go up, and that's about it really. You really shouldn't be hearing any knocking or anything like that. Very important, because the Mechatronics gearbox can fail quite spectacularly if they're not looked after. As long as you've got smooth gear changes, you're fine. It's only when the harsh gear changes start that you're going to have problems. Now, we don't know if it's a simple fix. The fix is usually you change the fluids and the filter and change one of the Mechatronics seals. That usually gets them going. But we don't want to play Russian roulette with this. I'd much rather buy a car which had good gear changes. And this one's got excellent gear changes. Right, let's get off the main road. So those changes were nice. From 5th gear into 3rd gear, it feels lovely. Right, the oil temperature's lifted off the bottom now, and it's quite okay to give it a bit of power. So we'll get it up to 3000 RPM and then floor it and see how well it does. Rear camera's checking for oil. Wow, oh my goodness. Now that's what a 650 is all about. It's really about that real raw power from these cars. No turbos or anything to get in the way to slow things down. So the amount of power on tap is fantastic, and it's there immediately as well. You don't have to wait for the turbos to spool up. It is absolutely fantastic power, and it's so tractable as well. That was 3rd gear, and the traction control light come on as we lost grip a bit, but no, that's what we're checking for. We're checking for that raw power, and also that we're getting no smoke while we do it. So let's turn around and go back where we came from. There we go. Again, smooth changes, 1st, 2nd, there's 3rd, hardly notice it. So that's very important. So the gearbox on this car is fine. It's a really great fettle, and we can use the Steptronic to control the power a lot better. I don't usually use the sports button. Now, when the Mechatronics has got problems, if you put it into sport, then you notice the gear changes much more, and they can become very harsh. But I prefer not to use sport, because you get the full power from the engine without it being in sport mode, and using the Steptronic box, you've got full power, full control over the engine. Power comes in about 2500. We're at 2750, 2nd gear. Wow. I'm checking my rear view mirror, no smoke or any problems like that. I'm perfectly happy with this car. Really all it's down to now is make sure the soft top works properly. Rear window, very important. They do get stuck. and then you can't get the soft top up or down. So we have to check that. And then really it's just looking around the car and making sure you're happy with everything else. I obviously haven't gone into any great depth. That's not the purpose of this. There's many things you can look at on these cars, but all we've been interested today is the main hardware, engine and gearbox. The last thing being the soft top, because that's a very expensive part of the E64. So we're going to make absolutely sure the top goes up and down smoothly. If it starts flopping about, especially as it comes over the top, then you've got things wearing out, and that's not a good thing with the soft top. Oh, so I just love the 650 though. I mean, that's the whole reason to have a 650, is just that raw power. You just can't help yourself on these little B roads. Oh, that power, that's just fantastic. Right, the next check we do is to make sure the car hasn't been water damaged. Now the E63 and E64 do suffer from blocked drains. Yeah, they've got massive shut lines in these cars, all sorts of things get in there, and then the water drains get blocked up. Now on this side, the right side of the car, and vice versa for left-hand drive cars, we've got the brake booster. And what happens is the water will fill up where the brake booster lives, and then the water will come through a grommet and start coming on into the driver's footwell. So we need to check all the footwells of this car, front and back, and the boot as well, or trunk, to make sure that hasn't happened, because it's impossible to get water out of carpets in a car. It really is hard work. So we want to make absolutely sure that hasn't happened to this car. Okay, let's have a look. I'll get you off the stand. Righty-ho, so as I said, the place where water comes in first usually is around the brake pedal. And as I said, the brake booster compartment fills up, and then there's a grommet at the top here where a wiring loom comes through, and also the brake master cylinder. And when that cavity fills up with water, water starts coming out around the brake pedal. It's not pleasant at all. So what you have to do is you have to peel back the over carpet and give it a damn good squash around the brake pedal and around this area as well. Yeah, very important to check for any dampness. That's fine, obviously. Okay, and we'll do exactly the same for the passenger side and the rear compartments as well. They can get wet, so seat forwards. Move the seat forward with the button. Over carpet off. And have a good squash down here. Damn good press. Try and squash any water out of that carpet. That's fine, no problem at all. Okay, so we do that for all of those 4 areas. That's fine. And then the last thing we do is the boot. Let's go around to the boot, or trunk. And the place where water usually settles is around the battery, so we have to get the carpeted areas up. So let's get that up. And the fiberboard underneath it. Move my junk out of the way as usual. And yeah, have a look around where the battery sits. If water comes in, that's usually where it settles, around here. But also check all around these areas. Lift up the tray. Make sure there's no water in any of these cavities. Obviously rather terminal if you get water in there with all those electrical parts. Okay, and then also check the cavities around the side where people keep junk like I do. Make sure none of those areas is damp. Right, that's it for water drains. Right, here we go with the soft top. It can be done from the key by pressing and holding that button. Quite a few things happen when you do that. The rear window has to go down, side windows have to go down. If any of that doesn't happen, the roof won't do anything. So all those things can be checked at once. So long press on the key, windows have gone down, the back window's fully down. Now what we expect to happen is the top release here. There we go, that's up. Back comes up, rear deck opens, folds away without any clonks and bonks, should smoothly go down, and then the rear deck closed. That's it. I mean, that's how it should work. And of course, doing it back up again, you can't do from the key. I know it can be programmed from the key, but not on my car. So the other important thing, the key has to be in the ignition. And we're going to roll up the roof, so I'm going to press that button. Very important that we don't get a red light at all while this happens. So here we go. There it goes, rear deck up. Up comes the hood. Should smoothly go over the top here. There we go. Rear deck goes down, so that's closed. Top comes down, and then it'll clamp onto the top here. And that's it. All windows wind up. Keep hold of the button. There we go. All windows closed. No red light. That's very important. If you get a red light, that's it. Again, walk away. The soft top can be very expensive to repair. Right, there we go then. That's about it. As I said, this isn't a full buyer's guide. I've done one of those already. This is about buying one from a garage forecourt and the most important things to look out for, so you're not going to buy a lemon. Right, if you really want to see a buyer's guide where I go through all the features of the car and how it handles and things like that, then I'll put the link up above here. Have a look at that. But this one is all about how to buy a good one. Thanks very much for viewing. Thanks for all the comments. I love reading all the comments. Fantastic. And thanks for subscribing. Press a like if you liked it, and I'll see you next time.